Tonight. I'm putting this on Facebook Live, like I mentioned earlier. They won't be able to see you all; they'll just see us, like they see us right now. And so we are joining many of our friends here from Vegas and also from here in Southern California. And so, Julie, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Uh,
Sure.
we're going to kind of continue the conversation that we had um, on Sunday, where we talked about trauma and parenting and just kind of continuing that. And so, one of the things that I wanted to just kind of plant the seed, if anybody has a question that you could go ahead and ask it, and you could put it in the chat box. That way, as we go along, we can uh, answer it as it comes up. So if anybody wants to ask a question, you're more than welcome to do that. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we can jump in here to a time together. Okay. God, we thank you for your goodness. Thank you for allowing us just to be able to gather here tonight. Thank you for Julie and just all the things that you have done to get her to the spot where she's helping others learn how to TBRI and come alongside these families and kids that are just hurting. And so we pray your blessing on our time tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, Tamika.
Hi.
Good to see you. Uh, well, you guys are kind of more the experts than I am on this. And so I had emailed you guys some various different topics that I wanted to touch base on. Um, and so, Julie, I'm wondering if you guys could kind of kick it off just a little bit, like on a basic understanding for what trauma is,
It's on.
for like a baseline for us.
You want me to start with that?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So well, can I ask a question first? Who is parenting children with trauma? Are you guys foster adoptive parents? Let me kind of talk about trauma in that context.
I'm a teacher. I teach at a school that I'm actually one of Mark and Michelle's children's teacher, but and connected through the church. And I'm a teacher. I can add more to that, but
I begged two of the people on here to come because they have my daughter a lot, and Lindsay is also a teacher.
Yeah, I'm also a teacher. I teach Mark and Michelle's kids. I don't have kids of my own, but I've experienced my own trauma. I do work with their kids, and I'm volunteering at the church. So I'm also at the same school as Heather.
I would say I have my own trauma as well. I wasn't going to add that, but I will now that she was brave enough to share that. So it's been interesting. I was going to ask a question about that, but I'll let others speak.
Well, let me kind of start. Thank you guys for that, and I'm so thrilled to see so many teachers here. And let me just start by saying that most of us who have gone on into these helping fields have done so because of some sort of personal connection. So, and there's an interesting statistic that when you look at all foster, there was some research done of who is adopting and fostering children and what those folks' attachment styles look like. And it was like 90% of people that are entering into foster care or adoption have had insecure attachment styles in their history. Whether or not that's been resolved, they didn't go into that. But I think that all of us are called into these helping fields because of some sort of personal connection. So I just want this to be a safe space this evening that we can talk freely, not only about trauma in kids' lives, but trauma in our lives and how those two intersect. and hope we can have a group agreement that anything that's shared here kind of stays here, and that we're communicating with respect about that. So in terms of trauma and that intersection with children, sometimes we don't know. We've talked a little bit on Sunday about implicit and explicit memory, about how some of these memories that we have are unconscious, and then come to light when we're parenting kids. And so our own trauma histories are kind of percolate up when we least expect it. And it's kind of, children come into our lives, whether they're foster care, adoption, bio, typically developing children with special needs. They come into our lives and they hold up a mirror, and it shows us it brings all that past experiences to light. And sometimes that's going to be a positive thing and great memories, and sometimes that's going to be a more challenging experience. So that's just kind of something to think about. Mark, you want to shoot me another question?
I think that's fascinating that 90% of those who adopt or foster have insecure attachment styles.
I lost it.
Wow, that's
Eva, Stella.
I fall in that.
Somebody come help me.
There we go.
I fall into that attachment style.
Yeah, I did too. And I think in full transparency, definitely I had, I've got some trauma in my past and trauma history. And it was interesting because when I went through the training to become a TBRI educator, they put all of us through an adult attachment inventory. So if you're ever interested in kind of diving into that a little further, there's a tool that therapists can use called the Adult Attachment Inventory. Finding people specifically trained in that tool is sometimes a little bit of a challenge, but any trauma therapist or therapist that is worth their salt knows about at least kind of how to dive into attachments, theory. At any rate, I digress. We go back to when I went through that inventory, it came up as earned secure attachment. And so attachment styles are fluid. So even if, I'm 48 years old and I can still be intentional about how my attachment style is. And just a little primer on attachment styles. Attachment styles are ways of interaction with ways that we have developed based on our caregiving. So in our histories, when we were raised by parents, caregivers, whoever were our primary caregivers, they interacted and responded to our needs in certain ways. And there's kind of predictable patterns to that. And sometimes those patterns are dismissive. So kind of old school parenting was, hey, you fell down, big boys don't cry, or big girls don't cry, suck it up, buttercup, let's keep going, right? So in those dismissive patterns, sometimes there's ambivalent patterns where, it's the parent is responding almost kind of like you think of a slot machine. Like the child keeps doing a behavior and sometimes the parent responds and then sometimes the parent doesn't respond, and it's very unpredictable. And then there's secure attachment. So when a child comes to a parent with a need, the parent is consistently and nurturing and responding in that way. So I'll give you an example of kind of how it plays out in our adult life. I tended to have some dismissive attachment, features, I guess I would say. And I used to do foster parent training. And at the end of the foster parent training, sometimes people would say, hey, I'll stay with you and I'll be happy to help you clean up or whatever. And I'd be like, no, I got it. No problem. I can handle it. And I wouldn't easily accept help. And then when I started looking into my attachment style, I realized, wait a second, that's kind of dismissive, right? I'm kind of choosing not to engage in that connection in that moment. So I could choose to do something different. And I found that was helpful in making that shift. So in terms of our children our children's attachment style closely mirror what our own attachment styles have been as an adult. So it is fluid, and it is something that you can change, and you can heal that over time and be intentional about the way you approach relationships.
And if you do just to chime in here, if you do the training, they do go over and you can figure out which attachment style you are in there briefly.
Yeah.
I'm just like, as I'm looking at the grid and seeing people who are on the Facebook Live thing, I'm personally thinking, man, am I screwing my kids up by my attachment style? First and foremost, that's what I'm thinking. Thank you, Jimmy, for affirming that. But gosh, where do we even begin to understand and discern, besides going to a training, to discern our attachment style or to figure that out? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a lot of great books so people get information in different ways. I'm a reader, so I would dive into books. Not everybody has the time or the bandwidth for that. And interestingly enough, I find that so many people that are usually avid readers during this whole stay-at-home craziness are like, I just can't focus on reading right now. It's too much. So in that way, I would say, go to YouTube and look at Dr. Purvis's, video clips. The Empowered to Connect website is a really great resource. The other folks that I think have done some really great work on relational connection, and looking at as an adult, is Dr. Curt Thompson. He is a neuropsychiatrist, and his work is amazing. So I would Google that, watch his stuff on YouTube. He's got some incredible books.
You can YouTube.
I don't like to do I don't want to focus as much on the clinical aspect of it as the really tangible everyday nuggets that we all could absorb, and so definitely Dr. Curt Thompson, Dr. Purvis, Dr. Cross, anything from TCU. Another interesting tool that I've been diving into in terms of kind of how to understand ourselves and how we operate has been a book called The Road Back to You. And it's kind of a Christian way of looking at the Enneagram. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. That's been a really enlightening tool for my husband and I to look at. And there's also a website called Your Enneagram Coach, and she's got a lot of training and resources, again, from a very strong Christian perspective of understanding why we do the things we do and how we operate. And I think that's really a good first step to kind of understanding ourselves and how we respond.
I would encourage everybody, regardless of where you're at, is to go and look and find some of the talks from Curt Thompson and about shame. The Anatomy of Shame, The Soul of Shame, I think, are some of his talks. But just an incredible, gifted communicator, pretty brainy, but also witty, and just really appreciate his perspective on really the brain and how it's made up for being hardwired for different things. So pretty interesting for sure. Let me push pause here. I want to make sure we give space for people to ask questions as well as we kind of chug along here. So I've muted. I'm policing everybody and muting you. If you're wondering, like, why the heck is my mute button keep going on? It's because I'm muting you. But if you want to ask a question, please either chime in on the chat box or unmute yourself and just butt in. But are there any questions that you want to ask Julie or Michelle, or something that you would like to process with us Because I don't want the time to slip away and 7:55 rolls around and you're like, oh, we didn't touch on, so.
Heather had a question originally.
Heather, you said you had a question originally.
Well, it's a question, but I'll just say, I noticed that this year I have a pretty good handle on how to reach my favorite kids, which are usually the hardest ones, the ones that other teachers will go, that child is just too whatever. They're my favorites. They're the ones I relate to the most, because I think I felt like that was the only place I ever got understood was at school, was with a teacher in the 3rd grade that connected with me and made me feel important and valued. And so I tried that, and I didn't realize how deep some of the stuff I'd been through had hit me until I went through an episode at school one day with our friend, and it triggered that deep need of wanting to soothe that sadness and that hurt. And I guess I'm still processing all that, going through counseling, but what would you recommend in the moment as a teacher? If you're triggered, to just try and protect and act? I think I handled everything as well as I could, but I didn't realize how much I empathize with what they're going through on a deep level, and not wholly understand where they've been. I don't know everything that happened before Mark and Michelle took over and brought Justice home as their baby. I don't know but I guess, how do you stop in the moment to yourself from acting so deeply?
Well, I love your heart, Heather. I love that you're creating some space for this, not only to determine the wisdom that you need to support the child, but also that recognition that, wow, like, there's some deep stuff that has surfaced here, and I need to take care of that. And I'm really glad to hear that you're in therapy, because that definitely is the place to take all of that. And I think sometimes it surprises us. Dr. Thompson tells a story about a family that he was working with, and it was a couple, a husband and a wife, and they had adult children with grandchildren. And the wife came to him and said, you need to fix this guy, because if you can't fix this man, like, we may end up in divorce, because I don't know what has happened, but he has changed and something has happened. And we're at our wit's end. And the husband ended up having sessions with him, and it was like, I don't know why I'm here, but like, I feel disconnected, and I'm having these big feelings, but I can't really figure out what's going on. To make a very long story short, what was happening was this man had become a grandfather, and this little grandson was preschool age. And then when they worked through, and when Dr. Thompson worked through this with this man, it came to light that he had watched his brother be killed, hit by a car at the same age that his grandson was at. So it's interesting that, that all of that deep pain and loss didn't come out in the same way when he was parenting his children. But then he, in the stage of his life that he was in, and this grandchild, it just all percolated up. And the good news is you can go back and heal that. The bad news is it's going to be a raw and painful journey. So I would give yourself a lot of grace, and create margins for yourself, give yourself permission to take good care of yourself. I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of I'll do that. I can help you. I can do that. And I can't wait to serve you type of gal, right? And we had talked about when I was in therapy with my daughter, that attachment therapy, and Tuesdays, we would leave those therapy sessions and I was a wreck, like a total emotional wreck. I was crying. I felt raw. I felt exposed. It was just really, it was brutal. And I didn't really have the language to specifically say why I was feeling that way. So it's a little disconcerting, to kind of fall off your horse, so to speak. And so I started to realize, you know what? I got to dial things back here and take care of myself. I can't just keep going at the pace that I'm going. I need to drop off some of those things that I normally do and give myself some time to be reflective. And what I did was, I'm an early bird. So in the mornings, every morning I was getting up and I was reading my Bible. One of the other authors that was really helpful for me at that time was Ann Voskamp. I don't know if you're familiar with her. I was reading her book and just having aha moments all over the place. And so that was my quiet time to journal. And I really feel like God just kept putting things in my path that were like these little healing nuggets for me. Mm-hmm. So I definitely would recommend create space for yourself and really enter into that. Because I promise you, you will come out the other side, and that tender place is going to heal. And you will know that is really healing over when you encounter another situation with a child and you can empathize, but you're not falling off your horse, definitely. And I think in terms of, I think you're asking me about the response with the child. If you kind of are tearful in that moment, I would explain to that child, I feel sad for you, or give them some sort of language as to what's happening, because kids from a trauma history are really hypervigilant and they need to know that you're in command at that time. So I would just give voice to that and say, you know what, my heart feels sad and I remember, some sad times and we're going to get through this together. Mm-hmm. Or if you need to take a few minutes to compose yourself, just be honest about that and transition that child to another adult for a few minutes and, go take care of yourself for a few minutes. But definitely it's all about kind of giving yourself that space and seeking out resources to keep learning and growing. But it's entering in to learn about how to parent and care for children with trauma. There's a lot that needs to happen up here, and there's lots of great resources for that. But there's definitely a lot of work that needs to happen here, and these things need to be connected. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. I agree with that. And God has been very faithful in so many ways through this whole adventure. So thank you.
Good.
You have anything you want to say on that?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm going to read Marna's question, Julie. It says, I feel like my biggest struggle with my 5-year-old son who experienced neglect is manipulation. I feel like he is working me over. He is. That's my commentary. That's my commentary. He's been diagnosed with partial FAS and ADHD, so he doesn't put cause and effect together, so we have the same issues over and over. How can I use TBRI to connect and empower him and correct these behaviors? What are some resources or tools to use to heal dismissive attachment?
Yeah. So the good news is it will get better. The bad news is it feels like you're stuck in Groundhog Day, and I know Mark and Michelle can attest to that. I think that one of the pieces is when you have that same, it feels like a learning circle instead of a linear forward momentum a lot of times. And I would, depending on what the specific behavior is, I would first of all, I would prioritize what behavior is the biggest concern for you. Because a lot of times parents will come to us and say, oh my gosh, like here's my laundry list of all these things we need to fix. And you're going to make yourself crazy if you're trying to address all of those at the same time. And you're going to make your child crazy, which will then expand the list. So I think the prioritizing, what is the first priority in terms of the cause and effect or the situation that I want my child to learn. If it's I usually prioritize safety issues. Like if it's a safety issue that when we're transitioning from the house to the car and I need my child to not run down the street or into the street, then that's the first thing you're going to focus on. And really using the TBRI principles to focus on that first behavior. And you're going to just keep working on that and working on that and working on that. And that will improve. Repetition is going to help make new neural pathways, but it definitely is going to take time. And celebrate the little victories is really another piece. I remember our daughter that had the very significant trauma. One of the problems that she was having, I think I addressed this on Sunday, was that she would verbal vomit, but it was like violent language and just really disturbing to the other kids in the household. And I just had to remember I'm teaching a skill and to disconnect my emotional reaction to that, because and that kind of goes back to thinking about how is this behavior impacting me and what are my automatic responses to that. And then when you can cut that automatic response, manipulation's hard, right? Depending on our history, that's really hard because we feel it feels like it takes our power away and it really brings up all the old stuff. And in full transparency, manipulation was a hard thing for me as a parent. I mean, I had a child who would manipulate to nobody's business, and it was driving me crazy. It escalated my fear. It escalated my frustration. I was more verbally like reactive and emotionally reactive when my child was engaging in these behaviors. And so a very wise person told me, think about how you feel when your child is doing that manipulation. And then think about in your own life, who in your life has made you feel the same way you're feeling right now? And it was like a light bulb went on. And I was like, well, I can tell you exactly who did that. And it was a parental unit, you know? And then it made it easier for me to kind of disconnect from that reactivity that I was having and to be able to look at it more as all behavior is communication. And so what is my child trying to do with this behavior? And really manipulation is a desperate need for control, right? And that desperate need for control, the more they're manipulating, the more they feel the need for control. So how can we bring their need for control down a little bit? We can share some power. So as much as possible, I'm going to empower my child to have a voice and to exert some influence over their daily life. Do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? You know, do you want the purple cup or the green cup? Do you want quesadilla or mac and cheese? Like, and constantly two choices. With a child that has fetal alcohol, I'm presuming that it's a younger child. We're not in the teens yet, but again, you know, two choices. Do you want this or this? Would you like to go to the park or ride bikes? Would you like to do this or this? And constantly, as much as possible, give two choices, right? Because then they're going to start to feel that they have power. For older kids, one of the things that has been really helpful for us is this idea of sharing power. And the way that we would do that, if you have the child that's always going to push the envelope and say, well, I don't want choice A or choice B, I want choice C, right? They're going to push that envelope. So what we have always done with our kids, and again, we didn't invent this, we just watched mentors and learned this stuff, right? And one of the things that we've had that's been helpful for us is that if our child does not agree with choice A or choice B, or feels that they have some other thing to add, we've always told them that they can ask for a compromise. So they can ask for a compromise. It needs to be with respect. And as much as possible, we want to give yes, give yes, give yes, give yes. And so when a child says, I'd like to have a compromise, I don't want the blue cup or the purple cup, I want the big fat cup. Okay, great. Thank you for asking with respect. And yes, I'm happy to, I will grant that. We want to say yes as much as possible so that when we have to say no, we can go to our child and say, hey, I want to say yes as much as possible, and I will say yes as much as possible, and sometimes I'm going to have to say no, and it's your job to learn how to accept that, right?
Hey,
so
Julie,
that's another way.
Let me just push pause there on that, because I think that's probably one of the most challenging things to do, is to find a way to say yes a lot.
Yes.
Especially after you have a lot of history with somebody, because you are like, I don't want to say yes to anything.
That's right.
So I don't think there's really anything you can say to that other than maybe I need to go to counseling for that stuff. But
no, Mark, we've all been there. I mean, and some of us are still sitting in that place, right?
Yeah.
Parenting's a lot like whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
You finally get one thing handled and then something pops up. So I hear you on that. I think one of the dangers is that we get really caught up, and I was the queen of the consequence, let me tell you, where our child has so many behaviors that we're constantly, well, there's a consequence for that. There's a consequence for that. There's a consequence for that. And I will even tell you, one of my daughters is now 13, and probably even up to 2 months ago, we were in a season of heavy duty consequence, and it was feeling really crappy. And I feel like we were all kind of circling the drain a little bit because the issues were related to technology and safety. So, I mean, come on, we got to parent that, right? We got to be on top of that. And it was consequence. So you did this, there's a consequence, there's a consequence, there's a consequence. And the more I loaded on the consequences, the more her behavior drove through the roof. Until finally I'm back with the therapist saying, I am losing my mind because now my perception of my child is negative. I'm really in a rut, right? And it took, how I got out of that rut and how my husband and I got out of that rut is, we went to the therapist and we're like, preach us some truth here, because we are really struggling with this child, to look at this child and separate the behavior, all the things that we know to do, right? Separate the behavior from the child, see the child's preciousness. I'm telling you, in that moment, I was not seeing that preciousness, right? I was dragging. It really did help. We went out to dinner with some friends that are also parenting children with trauma histories, and they just let me verbal vomit, right? And just getting that out in that safe place with friends, they kind of gently brought me back, right? And reminded me, my kid's precious. My kids had a hard time, right? Yeah. These are hard years. So feel the feelings, get that stuff out in a safe place, and then put your work boots on and get back to doing the right thing. And fake it until you make it. So even if you have to really struggle to see one strength in your child, I don't care if you have to put a Post-it note on your bathroom mirror in the morning and every bathroom mirror in the house, or write it on your hand. We have to get back to striving to do that. And I will tell you that it didn't take long until I started seeing, when I made just even the slightest shift in my approach to her, she latched onto that, which then started us in a better momentum. And so we actually paused all of the consequence. And she's old enough that we could have a discussion about, okay, here's mom's and dad's concern about all the technology and what you were looking at. Here's why we're concerned. What are your concerns? And I kind of feel like I have a little advantage because I'm a social worker. And so I used some of those strategies. We sat down and we wrote a plan. So we went to ice cream and we actually wrote a plan. This works for my daughter. I have to say, it doesn't work for some of the other kids, but it worked for my daughter. And we actually wrote it down. what's working well. And we wrote down all of the things that were working well. And that was an interesting thing because she came up with things that encouraged me. Like, she's like, well, I like it when we sit down and have tea and scones together. Or even little things that I was kind of dragging myself out of the rut. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a fun thing that we do together. Mm-hmm. Then we had a column of what are we worried about, right? And so she listed worries, I had worries, Dad had worries, we wrote them all down, and then we made an action plan. And we still go back to the plan. Like, we'll have a little check-in. We go out for ice cream, let's check in on the plan. How's this working? And is this working? Yeah. And it just gave us the forward momentum that we needed. Yeah. In terms of getting back to the kiddo with the fetal alcohol, repetition is the key. So again, I'll go back to my example with the verbal vomit and my child that was verbal vomiting. Over and over and over, gentle and kind, right? Use your good words. And we would say that script all the time, all the time, all the time. One night, and I'm telling you, this is probably like 6 to 8 months of working on verbal vomit. Like, no joke. One night I had to work, and so my husband was man in the fort, and he had all the kids were having dinner, and he got a work call, and so he had to step outside and handle the work call. And lo and behold, the situation is primed for the child to blow the gasket and the verbal vomit, and the carnage is going to happen, right? And what happened was my daughter started, and then she stopped herself. She stopped herself, and it was like the neural pathway has been created. And so the whole family, like the kids were like, yay, you stopped yourself. And the siblings were like just doing a great job. Maddie, you did a great job. Like, this is so great. And then I come home and all the kids are so excited to report, we've dropped everything, go out to ice cream and celebrate the fact that she stopped herself, right? That behavior was learned. And so keep on keeping on, guys, because you will see these little victories. And even if it's the verbal vomit comes out and then she reins it back in, celebrate that, because the positive response is going to solidify that even more.
Thanks for talking about that. I'm just thinking about, like, as you're processing some of this stuff, something that I've realized more and more with myself, and I feel like I'm asking all the questions. When are you going to chime in here? Okay. Just this afternoon, we're running around crazy and doing all kinds of too much. We're trying to do too much in a short amount of time and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm like, okay, boys, you're going to help clean up, blah, blah, blah. So several of them jumped to it, and one of them just laid on the floor. And, I'm like, don't you know what I just said? Like, I'm having one of these moments where, like, in a normal setting where there's not secondary trauma that we have experienced as parents, I would say, like, hey, you know what, dude? What's going on? But instead, I go from like 0 to 90 in 5 seconds because of this very real thing that I believe is so prevalent. Even people without trauma in their background have been affected by secondary trauma. I don't know what the right question is here, other than saying in those moments, I know the right thing is that we have to pull ourselves out of those moments. But, like, I think about people who, like, see our reactions or hear about... And it's like, man, it's just like a very real thing for us to deal with.
Or when someone calls the cops on you because they see something go down, but it's not really what they think is going down, but they can't they can't process what's going on. They don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
Well, in full transparency, I've had the cops at my house. I called them to say I have a child. You know, I was advised by the crisis team that the way I needed to do this was, you know, we had a child that tried to leap out of the car when the car was moving. So that resulted in the police coming to our house and a whole big shenanigans. So, not every police officer is going to understand that. So, but I think if I'm hearing what your question is, what do you do about that? What do you do when you're?
Yeah, I think it's like this, this acknowledgement that it's maybe more just empathizing with those who have children who have been through trauma, of just saying, man, it's just kind of a wacky, weird niche world that you live in.
Yes.
And like Marna is on here, and I mean, I think it was kind of like one of those moments. They have 4 bio kids and 3 foster adopted children, and she sent a text, I think, to Michelle, was just kind of like, man, this is hard. I don't think I realized how hard it was.
I know what it was. She sent me a text and she said, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you more when you lived here. And I cannot tell you how healing that was for me.
Yeah.
Because even though when we lived in Vegas, like, it's not like she was a bad friend.
Right.
But no one there got me. No one there understood. And she was acknowledging, I didn't get it. And now I do. And I'm so sorry that I wasn't that friend for you. It brought me healing.
So I don't know if there's necessarily a question here, but other than like I see the 3 teachers on here, like when we try to explain ourselves or our child to them, I mean, sometimes we sound like lunatics.
Yeah.
and so it's kind of like, hey, so you're going to have, like, I remember like one of the sub, Miss Heather was absent for a day, and the sub was there, and I walked straight up to her and I was like, hey, so who are you? She's like, I'm the sub for Justice and this Miss Heather. And I was like, okay, great. Hey, why don't you write my number down? And she was like, well, okay. And I was like writing it down for her and handing it to her. And she was like, well, we have protocol. And of course I'll go to Miss Cindy and I was like, oh yeah, Miss Cindy, fully aware of who we are. But before you go to Miss Cindy, as the volcano's exploding, just text me so that, you know, and it just...
Response time.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know what the question is.
Yeah. Let me ask the teachers. Everyone on here knows my children and deals with my children. But 2 of them specifically deal with my children every day. So what can you tell them in the moment when my child has lost their marbles? What should they do?
Well, first of all, I just want to fist bump you guys because you're awesome for wanting to dive into this and enter into the mess. I want to answer that, but I want to circle back to something really quick. I have found that people that are willing to enter into this difficult realm of parenting, and not just foster care and adoption, but really seeking to explore why kids are doing the things that they're doing, and how do we learn who they are, and how do we help them understand themselves, and really walk alongside kids in this mess, are my favorite humans in the world. And we in our family, when we started having all these trauma behaviors and stuff, we actually had a family member say, do you think your child's behaving that way because you don't have as many pictures of that child in your house as you do other people? And it was like, I mean, are you kidding me? So later on, several years later, that same family member came to me again, like your friend did, and said, I'm so sorry. I did not know. And then a lot of healing happened. So finding your tribe is critical. In terms of teachers and dealing with that, I think the key piece is, keep your eye on the prize, right? And stay in the moment. We need to stay in the moment, and we need to stay, teachers and parents, when they are connected with good communication and you really understand each other, you both are working toward the same shared goal. So that should be really clear between parents and teachers, right? So that what is happening at home in terms of communication is the same language that's happening at school. And there's just that consistency, which shuts down a lot of opportunity for manipulation, right? Which is a difficult thing for kids. So the more that you can understand as a teacher, as a parent, your own responses to things, the more you can sort that out, the better and more effective you'll be with the child. And I would just also remember, you're creating a pretty sacred space for that kid and giving them some grace. If you need, teachers are constantly raising and lower this bar, right, of expectations for our child, because they've got this, you guys have this short window of time that you're with them. So every day you're going to see that kid come in and you're going to quickly figure out, this is not the day that I can accomplish the goal that I set. So we're going to have to lower the bar. And let's see if we can get here. And then tomorrow will be a new day. And then we'll see if we can raise it a little higher. But you're constantly going to have to be flowing and adapting to meet that kid where they're at in that moment. So I'm probably going to tick off some of the teachers, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. I'm way, way, way more concerned about how a child learns to handle relationships than I am about teaching them to read and write. Because if they are not heard, and if they don't feel heard and feel understood and feel valued as a human and have the space to heal, then that is more of a lifelong trauma than learning our ABCs or whatever it is. I have, in our own experience, we had a period of time with our bio kids and also our kids that we adopted, that we pretty much unschooled for a period of time. And I won't lie, I felt this pressure of, come on, they were in first and third, our boys were in first and third grades when we just plucked them out of school and we decided to homeschool, and I was like trying to figure out how all this worked. And so my bar every day started out here and had to lower. But I'm telling you that because we took that pause and we created a space and all we worked on was relational stuff, right? How do I give care to somebody else? How do I receive care? How do I use my words to express my needs? When that was our goal, then my kids' academics, we could always catch that up. And our daughter that has the significant trauma, she basically did no schooling from the time that she was 6 to 7 years old. I mean, virtually none. I mean, played games, that kind of thing, but there was no real formal education. She was homeschooled. Within one academic school year, she was almost caught up. So all of us are always going to have holes in our learning, and we can fix that. It's harder to, I always attend to this first. So that's kind of my, yes, you're there to teach academics, but don't ever lose sight of the fact that your relationship and every interchange that you have with that child can either be a healing experience or not. And I would always go for the healing experience.
Mm-hmm. And let me just say, our school, our teachers, they've been, they're amazing, and they totally get that, and I'm so thankful, and it shows because 2 of them are here. So they really do get it, and they really do care about our kids. So I will say yes, kudos to you teachers. But not all teachers, because it was not that way in Vegas, Marna. It was not that way. They were so heavy on the academics because it was one of the lowest states in the nation. It was the lowest state in the nation. So they just kept pushing the children, and therefore my child. I would like to, Tamika, I see your hand. Mark is coming back. Let me see. I don't normally do this. I guess I'll unmute you. Are you still there, Tamika? Hey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay.
Go ahead.
So I have a child that nothing seems to work for. I don't care what adjustments you make. I was very fortunate to have a mother who actually knew about attachment parenting. And, you know, she made her fair share of mistakes. But I got certain things at home that people just didn't get, especially at the time that I was being raised. For example, I was allowed to have my say as long as I was respectful. You know, I was raised in the time, you know, the children are to be seen and not heard and all that type of stuff. Well, my family was not like that. But I am an extremely aggressive personality. I am very loving. If anything goes down in your life, you're going to want me on your team. But just the opposite is just totally true. And so it's like a constant fight with myself to manage this kid, especially when nothing works.
Can I ask what child is?
He's 15 now. But it's just always been that way, you know? And when he was in early elementary school, he could behave all day at school to get a piece of candy at the end of the day. I can't do that. I am 49 years old, and just rest assured, if you have some nice shiny object that I want, and the circumstances become rough for whatever reason, the Holy Spirit can help me keep it together, but me wanting that object is not going to keep it together. But he can. So it gets really, it just gets really, really frustrating. And it used to be that I could find a way to reach him, but the last at least 5 years, I just haven't been able to, you know, and I'm really big on setting you up to succeed, you know, so I'm generally not going to put you in a circumstance that I already know you can't handle. But it just doesn't seem to matter where you make an adjustment. It's just the same thing. And therapy has produced like nothing. You know, I don't want to talk to another therapist for them to say, well, if your mom lets you play 10 minutes of video games, will you take out the trash? This young man is about to enter life. Nobody's going to give a damn about his trauma. That's the people you see the cops beating up on TV.
So, do you have anything else, or do you want me to give you a little 2 cents?
I would like to hear you.
My unsolicited 2 cents.
Well, no, it's solicited. I'm asking.
First of all, give yourself a little grace because teenage years are hard. You know, I mean,
yes.
I think there's a lot. I personally have been pleasantly surprised with the teenage years where it's hilarious and mind-numbing, frustrating, and it's like, it's so funny. They're like big puppies, and it's just funny. I mean, it's hilarious, I think. And also mad because you feel like it's Groundhog Day. So shout out to you for handling the teenage thing. I think that there's a couple things that come to mind when I hear you talking. One is, I'm going to give you the quick things because if I go on a tangent, I want you to bring me back. So motivation, your village, and let's go with those. So in terms of motivation, everybody is motivated by different things. So and unfortunately, I think in the world, we have a lot of motivation for kids, like, if you do a great job and get all A's, then, I will give you da da da. Or if you do this, I'll give you this thing. There are a lot of kids that don't respond to the carrot approach, right? And I think, it's been interesting too. Our job as parents is to figure out what motivates our kid and to follow that and guide that. And also there are kids that finding what is the motivator either changes frequently, like whack-a-mole, or it's really difficult to find that. And you have a 15-year-old. So one of the conversations that we've been having in our household, I have one child that finding the motivation is very challenging. And another layer to this is what happens when the external motivation goes away. So I have a child that was taking a class, an emergency responder, pre-emergency responder class, because his goal is to be an EMT paramedic. And he's been taking this class. He had 100% in the class, and he's driven, and he gets to class early, and he's doing all this great stuff, and he's doing his homework, and he absolutely was lapping it up with a spoon, super motivated. And then COVID hit, and the class stopped, and it didn't even go on online. This kid was crushed because all of a sudden this motivation that was driving him just dried up with no possible end in sight. So here's the life lesson, that what do we do? And I'm glad that we've had this COVID situation while my kids are still living at home, because it's a really good life lesson that what happens when that external motivation goes away? What happens when I have to pull myself up and figure out how to carry on when everything has changed? And there's no simple fix to that, but fortunately he's 15. So if you can have conversations with him, with this particular child that I'm talking about, we walk together. We love to walk together. We walk our dogs. And I find that when we're walking and talking, that's when we can really communicate. I can't tell you that we've solved the motivation problem, but we're still engaged and connected and trying to sort this out together. So motivation is a big deal. I think the other thing is about your village. So there have been times that I would really love to say that I can meet all my child's needs as a parent. Like, I would love to do that, but that's not the reality. I don't think that's any parent's reality. My oldest son and I have very different personalities. Like, we're very similar in some ways and we're very different in other ways. And there have been times that I really, I can see this kid needs to learn this skill or needs support with this. And I'm not the one to do that for him because he can't hear it from me. Not that I don't try, but it's just not going in. It's not sinking in. And that's why your village is so important. And so for us, we have really gotten deeply connected in our home church, and my kids have been really blessed with some really incredible adults pouring into them. So I know that my kid is going to get this piece that I really want him to hear. I'm confident that he's going to hear that from somebody else when he will be able to hear that message from him. Or when we're butting heads, somebody else can come around and help him. In my situation, sometimes if I want my son to be able to hear a message, my husband has to be the one to deliver it, right? Because they speak guy, you know what I mean? So I would just encourage you to figure out who in your tribe can your son spend some more time with, and where else can he get the support that he needs? And we as parents are not always going to be able to answer that. We have to find out from our kids, like, what do you need? And let me help you get connected to that. I think that's really critical. And I think the other piece is never giving up, right? It's our job never, ever, ever to leave the game. We have to stay in the game even when it's hard. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. And I know we may be running short on time, but I think I saw something else in the chat that I don't want to let go. Let's see. About the 2-year-old.
What can I do to help my 2-year-old heal from in utero and NICU trauma so she can sleep? And yeah, I would like to maybe go for about another 10 more minutes just to keep it around that hour and 15 or so.
Sure.
Just a little backstory on that. She is an angel during the day. She is happy. She's healthy. She's funny. She has a great time. As soon as she falls asleep, it's like she's possessed.
Like for real.
Like she does kicking. She'll whimper. She'll this deep sobbing cry that's really upsetting. Her whole body will tense up like she's almost lifting off the bed. Screaming, kicking, and then it's like every 2 or 3 hours. And then she wakes up happy. Like there's nothing. So the only thing I feel like as soon as she goes subconscious, there's stuff happening. But I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. But
so did this child have prenatal exposure? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, methadone and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. You got a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Do you have an occupational therapist that you work with?
We're in the process for our other 2.
Okay, so my first, at 2 years old, this child's 2 years old? Okay, so my first thought about that is that with kids that have had trauma, developmentally, they're always half of their age. So a child may be 6 years old chronologically, but developmentally they're 3. So basically you can look at this as you have a toddler, right? If you have not done a referral to the Tri-Counties Regional Center for her to be assessed, I would recommend that because she still potentially could be eligible for early intervention. That would include occupational therapy, all those other kinds of things. So if she has not had a full developmental assessment, that would be my first stop to make sure you do that. And sometimes the pediatrician doesn't know to refer families. But if you need some direction on getting connected, Michelle has my contact information. I'd be happy to do that. It sounds like a work with an occupational therapist would help. In terms of kind of things that you can do as a parent, I would cut out screen time well before, if she's having any screen time. I mean, she's 2, so I don't know how much screen time she would be having, but I would cut that off well before bedtime. And I would have a very predictable bedtime routine that's going to start helping her kind of dial it back and slow down and prepare for sleep. There's so very predictable evening routine. We're going to take a bubble bath, maybe put some lavender essential oil in the tub to help. Same exact routine every night. Some kids have a really hard time with not being in the dark, or even night lights are uncomfortable for kids because there's shadows and it feels scary. If kids need to sleep with the light on, kids sleep with the light on. Like, I would never be a stickler about that. Likewise, it may be, I would guess that your child has some sensory sensitivities at best. So so there could be a noise issue. I think that's why having an occupational therapist to work with you to do an assessment to see what you need to do to help her feel, get to that place where she can come back to center and decompress is really what you're going to need. It may be a weighted blanket, maybe a noise machine. A practical thing that you can do also to help is nutrition-wise. It's a tall order, I know, but I would cut out all artificial food colorings if your child has any of those. That, with kids with prenatal exposure and trauma, had a friend that had a little boy who was constantly in the principal's office starting off in kindergarten and preschool because he was bouncing off the walls. And mom was a research scientist and happened to see some article about red food dye mimics ADHD symptoms. So she just adjusted his diet, and the principal called her and said, "Oh, did you put your little boy on medication?" And she's like, "No, I cut out food dye." And it was like that noticeable. Some dietary changes can help. It's really helpful with our kids to help balance neurochemistry, to have water, a protein snack, and some sort of physical exercise like clockwork every 2 hours. Because kids that have had prenatal exposure, their neurochemistry fluctuates a lot more, and behaviors really change dramatically when there's dehydration, and they're much more predisposed to dehydration. So make sure they're hydrating. Weighted blanket, you could try that. And also like a little protein snack right before bed will help stabilize that neurochemistry. But in your situation, definitely would consult with an occupational therapist to figure out, what needs that child has to be able to to calm down and be able to sleep.
Can I add something to that? When you're doing the bath, put a little Epsom salt in there because it has magnesium and it's known to relax. Magnesium helps with stuff like restless leg syndrome and things like that. It can be really helpful. But she mentioned the weighted blanket. You gotta get that weighted blanket. That can be a total game changer by itself.
Marna, do you guys have one?
She screamed.
Oh, dang. Some kids don't like it. I have one that loves it and one that wants nothing to do with it.
Well, hey guys, I want to give one last call for one last question if anybody has it. But Julie, thank you so much for being willing to hang out with us for an hour and 15 or so. And I think it's always, whenever I watch Empowered to Connect, whenever I sit and hang out with people, I'm just reminded continually how much of every day this is. Like, you got to give yourself grace first and foremost, like truckloads and truckloads of grace. You have to take care of yourself in some way, shape, or form. You have to take care of yourself. And then you have to have one or two other persons who you can verbal vomit and connect with in some way, shape, or form. Just without those things, I don't know how people do it. And obviously, clearly, we at times fail at doing any and all of those things. But anybody have one last question that maybe Julie could speak to? And if not, no worries. Great. We're all trained church people to know that the pastor has given the you better ask a simple question or you're gonna get it. Hey, let me I opened with prayer. Hey Jimmy, I'm gonna put you on the spot, brother. Can you pray for us and these families and teachers and Julie, and just lift us up here and close us out? Can you do that?
Absolutely. Father, thank you for who you are. And we are so humbled that you call us sons and daughters, that you put us at this place of royalty, co-heirs to the throne. That you example the grace that we strive to have for ourselves and for our kiddos. And Father, we thank you for those in the front lines teaching our kiddos. We thank you for those who are seeking to be able to empower anybody to be a better parent, whether they are the parent of that child or not, that we can learn to help. And Father, thank you for a church like Reunion and people like the McKinneys who want to have a village around everybody's kids, not just
That's
their
right.
own, but everybody's. Whether they're members of a union or not, that we can pour life into kids because of the lives that you've poured into us. Father, I pray for all of us with hard kids, that you help us be more grace-filled with them and for ourselves when we completely screw it up and think we're the worst parents ever. That grace you give us that we can give ourselves. Father, thank you for media outlets like this, that we can be hundreds of miles apart and be so close and know that through the week, even though we don't see each other's faces, we know each other's hearts.
That's right.
So, Father, I ask that you continue to turn our hearts towards you and to let them beat one with yours. And, Father, continue to remind us in a tangible way that we are sons and daughters of the King Most High, and that we have this place because you adopted us. Puts us in a place of freedom. Father, we come before you to bring you honor and glory. We love you, we thank you, and we pray this all in the sweet and precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Grateful. Monahans, thanks for hanging out in the Winnebago.
I know. I was arguing one because I was like, I've never been in their bedroom, but it sure does look like a camper.
It's a camper.
Where are you?
Private practice office. It's my new office. I can write it off because I do teletherapy in here now.
Oh my gosh.
So good. So good.
We'll bring it. I won't wreck it. I won't, our maiden voyage won't be to the McKinneys and wreck it when we get there like we did with the van.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Grateful for you. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Michelle.
Thank you, teachers.
Yes, thank you.
Can we still talk to Jimmy and Marna?
We can. Hey.
But it's not going to be on Facebook.